From the moment you opened your eyes in this world, the game had already started, you just didn't know it yet. They gave you a name, wrapped you in labels, and told you who you were before you had the chance to ask. They gave you a flag to salute, a god to worship, a schedule to follow, and a set of invisible rules no one ever explains, because they don't want you to realize you're following them. You were born free, but freedom was the first thing they took from you. Think about it. Have you ever truly questioned the things you've been told since you were a child? Not just your beliefs, but the very structure of your reality. Why school feels like a training ground for submission. Why success always seems to mean stress. Why so many people you know feel disconnected, depressed, or numb, but still wake up every day to do the same exact thing. That's not life. That's a loop. A beautifully engineered, perfectly disguised loop designed to keep you obedient, distracted, and productive, but never truly alive. They call it society, but what it really is a system. One built not for your soul, but for your output. Your energy is their currency, and they've been collecting interest since day one. You see, the greatest scam ever pulled wasn't stealing your money. It was stealing your mind. And it starts when you're too young to notice. You sat in a classroom, didn't you? You memorized dates, repeated what they told you, got gold stars for staying quiet and red marks for coloring outside the lines. But were you ever taught how to think? Or just what to think? They never cared about your questions, only your compliance, because real education would make you powerful, and they're terrified of a powerful mind. They want predictability. Order, workers who obey, consumers who never feel enough, citizens who chase validation and never question the script. And the script is brilliant. Get good grades, they said. Go to college, get a job, buy a house, follow the path, stay in the lines, work your 40 hours, earn your 2-week vacation, and one day, maybe, you'll be free. But that freedom? It's always someday. It's always after the next raise, after the next title, after the mortgage is paid, after your body's tired, after your spirit's gone numb. They sold you a finish line that never actually exists, because as long as you keep running, they keep winning. But let's pause, not because I need to prove this to you, but because deep down you already know. You've felt it, haven't you? That quiet voice inside that whispers, something isn't right. That restlessness that no paycheck, no promotion, no possession can seem to silence. You've chased their version of success and you've still felt empty. That's not failure. That's your soul waking up. That's truth trying to break through the noise. And the noise is loud, louder than ever. Screens that never turn off. Notifications designed to trigger dopamine. Headlines crafted to make you afraid, outraged, addicted. Technology that promised freedom but feeds on your attention. Every swipe, every scroll, every like is data, behavior, habits, mapped, monetized, manipulated. They don't just study what you do, they predict what you'll do next. They don't give you information, they give you illusions. And the scariest part, you start to believe they're your own thoughts. But here's the truth. Most of what you call normal is actually programming. You were programmed to compete, not collaborate. To chase status, not connection. To fear change, not question it. From the toys you were given to the dreams you were sold, this was never about you. This was about creating a compliant identity, a well-behaved ego, something that looks like a person but lives like a cog. You were never meant to live like this. Numb in traffic, staring at screens, arguing online, feeling more connected than ever yet somehow more alone. You were not born to be efficient. You were born to be free. But freedom terrifies them, because a free soul doesn't need what they're selling. A free soul sees the system for what it is. A cage wrapped in convenience, decorated with empty rewards. And yet, they call this progress. They call this civilization. But what kind of civilization breeds anxiety, burnout, and depression as norms? What kind of progress makes people feel more lost, more divided, more exhausted with every passing year? Don't you see, the illusion of progress is the prison. They'll give you faster phones, smarter homes, digital currencies, but never true fulfillment, because fulfillment makes you whole, and wholeness doesn't buy. You are more than a worker, more than a username, more than your productivity. You are a living soul with infinite potential. But until you see the scam, you'll keep playing your part in it. You'll keep exchanging your aliveness for comfort, your purpose for approval, your awareness for entertainment. You'll keep thinking you're free while living inside a script someone else wrote for you. But you don't have to stay there. You don't have to stay there, because the cage only works if you agree it's real, and the moment you begin to question it, the bars start to dissolve. Not because the system changes, but because you do. That quiet voice inside you, the one that's been drowned out by deadlines, notifications, and noise, that's your truth. That's the part of you they could never fully erase. That's the signal that something sacred still lives beneath the programming. But waking up isn't easy, because the system has built escape rooms within escape rooms. It knows how to make rebellion just another product, a brand, a lifestyle. It'll sell you the illusion of freedom, trendy clothes, edgy slogans, curated aesthetics, while still keeping your soul under contract. And that's the genius of the scam. It doesn't fight you with force. It seduces you with comfort. It makes you think you're choosing when you're really just selecting from options it created. Think about it. They don't need to control what you do if they can control what you want. That's the real trick. To make you crave the chains, to make you laugh at truth, to turn attention into addiction and purpose into performance. Because once your desires aren't your own, they don't need to push you. You'll run toward the cage yourself. You'll defend it, worship it, fight for it, and call anyone who questions it crazy. But let me tell you something. Wanting more from life doesn't make you crazy. Wanting peace in a world that runs on pressure doesn't make you weak. And asking questions that make people uncomfortable, that's not rebellion, that's remembering. You're not here to survive the system, you're here to outgrow it. And you start by noticing the small things, how your phone knows you better than your friends do, how your feed gives you exactly what you crave, and exactly what keeps you scrolling. How a simple red dot can hijack your brain. That's not convenience, that's behavioral engineering. Every app, every notification, every recommended for you, it's not random, it's designed to pull you away from yourself. Because the more distracted you are, the less dangerous you are. Dangerous to what? To them, to the machinery, to the narrative that says this is just how life is. Because once you stop believing that, you become something the system can't handle, an individual with inner clarity. And that's the one thing they can't predict, the one thing they can't monetize. You've probably heard it before, that we live in the most connected time in history. But connected to what? To truth, to self, or just to servers and screens and cycles of stimulation that leave you more hollow than whole? You can have thousands of followers and still feel invisible. You can be praised for your productivity and feel like a ghost in your own life. You can follow every rule and still feel like you're dying inside. That's not failure, that's feedback, and if you're listening, it's telling you this isn't living. And here's what's even more wild. They knew this would happen. The architects of this system, whether you call them corporations, governments, or simply the structure itself, they knew that eventually people would start to feel the emptiness. So they built replacements, digital spirituality, surface-level wellness, filtered enlightenment. They'll give you meditation apps that track your every breath, but never teach you to listen to your own silence. They'll sell you a version of peace that depends on a subscription. Because if they can't stop you from waking up, they'll try to monetize the awakening. But you don't need another product. You need presence. You need stillness. You need the kind of truth that doesn't fit in an algorithm. Because the system you were born into was never built for your flourishing. It was built for your functionality. And your worth? It was tied to how much you could produce, how much you could buy, how well you could perform. But you are not a performance, you are not a profile, you are not a statistic in someone else's report, you are awareness. And awareness can't be tracked, controlled, or sold. And the moment you begin to live from that awareness, everything changes. The noise begins to soften, the urgency begins to fade, and you start to see the scam for what it is. A masterpiece of distraction, a symphony of almosts. Almost enough. Almost happy, almost free, but never quite. That's by design. Because the more time you spend chasing the next almost, the less time you spend asking the real question, why? Why do we work our entire lives to retire when we're too tired to enjoy it? Why are we trained to believe that sacrifice now is the only path to joy later? Why do we feel guilty for resting, ashamed of stillness, and afraid of simply being? Why are we more comfortable with burnout than with boundaries? And most importantly, why do we believe this is all there is? You're not here to blend in, you're here to wake up. You're here to see the pattern and choose something different, not because it's easy, but because it's real. Because your soul wasn't meant to be a side project. It wasn't meant to be squeezed into evenings and weekends. It was meant to lead. So let it guide you away from the noise, away from the programming, away from the expectations you never agreed to, because once you reclaim your mind, they lose their grip. And when enough people do that, the whole system begins to crack. And underneath the crack, there's light. That light, you see peeking through the cracks, that's the truth. And it's been waiting for you. Not in some future moment, not at the top of a mountain, not buried in some secret file. It's here. It's always been here, right beneath the noise, beneath the scripts, beneath the slogans, beneath the roles you were assigned without consent. It lives in the spaces you were taught to overlook, the stillness, the silence, the questions that kept you up at night. It's not found in a degree or a title or a 10-step plan to success. It's in the forgotten art of being, the sacred rebellion of presence. But presence terrifies a system that thrives on distraction. Because when you're present, you stop performing, you stop pretending, you stop needing the approval of systems that never had your best interest to begin with. When you're present, you begin to feel. And that's dangerous, because a person who feels deeply can no longer be manipulated. They can no longer be sold fear in the form of security. They stop looking outside for what can only be found within. And that's when the real unraveling begins. You begin to question the jobs that drain your spirit, the news that programs your perception, the algorithms that keep your mind in a loop. You begin to notice how so many of the things that were supposed to make life easier have only made it noisier. How your schedule is packed, but your soul feels empty. How you have instant access to almost anyone, yet still feel unseen. How we've confused stimulation for connection, convenience for progress, and busyness for worth. You start to see the trap not as some grand conspiracy, but as a subtle agreement, one you never realized you made. The agreement to trade depth for efficiency, meaning for productivity, wonder for certainty. You didn't ask for this. You inherited it from parents who were just trying to survive, from teachers who were just following the curriculum, from a society that forgot what it means to live. But now you see it. You see how the game is rigged, how the path that was sold as freedom was actually a funnel into roles, into routines, into responsibilities that keep your attention locked and your spirit caged. And once you see it, there's no going back, because truth once known cannot be unknown. You can pretend, you can numb, you can scroll, but you'll never unsee the veil being lifted. And so the question becomes, what now? What do you do when the world you've always known starts to feel hollow? When the ladder you've been climbing suddenly looks like it's leaning against the wrong wall? When the voices telling you to push harder, hustle more, sacrifice everything for a someday that never arrives start to sound like lies? You begin to listen to a different voice, one that doesn't shout, one that doesn't sell, one that doesn't care about your resume or your reach or your returns. It's quiet, ancient, patient, and it lives inside you. It says, slow down, come home, remember. It doesn't promise you a mansion or millions. It promises you something rarer. Wholeness. And wholeness is the one thing this system can never give you, because wholeness doesn't produce profit. They don't want you whole, they want you chasing. They want you fragmented enough to buy solutions, insecure enough to need their approval, confused enough to believe their narratives, and tired enough to stop asking questions. But not you, not anymore. Because the moment you stop chasing what they offer, you start remembering what you already are. Not a role, not a function, not a cog, a being, alive, aware, enough. You begin to withdraw your energy from the illusion. You stop feeding the beast with your time, your attention, your fear. You learn to say no. No to the urgency that's not real. No to the rules that were made to keep you small. Not in high-definition pixels, but in real light. In a sunrise, in a breath, in laughter that isn't rehearsed. You notice that the things which nourish you were never the things that cost the most. They were the things you were too busy to notice. A walk without a destination, a conversation without distraction, silence without fear. You realize that everything they told you was boring is where life actually lives. But make no mistake, this isn't easy. Unplugging from the matrix is not comfortable, because it means facing all the parts of yourself you've ignored. The anger, the grief, the questions, the parts that never fit. But those parts aren't your enemy. They are your compass. They're what's real in a world that rewards fake. And the more you allow them, the more free you become. And that's the paradox. The moment you stop running from discomfort, you stop being controlled by it. The moment you stop trying to be enough, you realize you always were. The moment you stop seeking approval, you find your own voice. And it doesn't whisper, it roars. And says, I remember. I remember who I was before I was told who to be. I remember what it felt like to live without permission. I remember a time before screens, before status, before the noise. And I choose that, not because it's trending, but because it's true. Because in a world that's lost its soul, remembering yours is the most radical act you can commit. And when you begin to remember, everything changes. Not because the world suddenly becomes softer, but because you're no longer walking through it asleep. You begin to see the games for what they are. Not just the big ones, politics, media, economics, but the quiet ones. The expectations you inherited, the roles you never chose. The fears that were passed down to you like family heirlooms, polished and rehearsed until you thought they were your own. But they're not. They never were. You didn't come here to live someone else's script. You didn't come here to keep the machine running. You didn't come here to obey, to repeat, to maintain. You came here to wake up, to see clearly, to burn away the lies and remember who you were before the world taught you to forget. And it's not just about breaking free from external control. It's about ending the internal war. The war between who you are and who you think you have to be. Between the truth of your heart and the mask you wear to be accepted. Between your essence and your performance. That war is exhausting. It's the root of your anxiety, your burnout, your quiet sadness. You think something's wrong with you, but the truth is, something's wrong with the world you were conditioned to adapt to. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to feel, to sense, to create, to love. And you don't need to ask for permission to come home to that. No one can give it to you, and no one can take it away. That's the lie. That your freedom is conditional. That your worth is something to earn, that you need to do more, be more, prove more, just to take a breath and say, I am here. But you are here. You're still here despite everything, despite the noise and the pressure and the programs, despite the shame and the stories and the fear. You are still here, which means you still have power. The power to stop, to unplug, to question, to listen, to begin again. And maybe that's the most dangerous act of all, to begin again. Not as a brand, not as a product, but as a human being, one who is not owned by a calendar, a company, a government, or a god, one who doesn't measure their life in likes or metrics or milestones, one who remembers that being alive is not about how fast you move, but how deeply you feel, how honestly you love, how consciously you choose. And now you begin to choose, not out of fear but out of truth. You choose to rest when the world says hustle. You choose to speak when silence is expected. You choose to leave when the energy is wrong. You choose to be present even when it's painful. And in that choosing you reclaim your life, not the one they sold you, but the one that was always yours. You might lose people. You might disappoint those who only loved the version of you that played along. You might find yourself standing alone. But solitude is not a punishment when it's filled with your own truth. When you stop betraying yourself to keep others comfortable, you stop bleeding your power into things that were never yours to carry. And that's when something beautiful begins. You remember how to breathe, not just the automatic inhale and exhale, but the kind of breath that fills you from the inside, that reconnects you to the moment, to your body, to the earth. You feel the weight of everything you were never meant to hold, and you begin to put it down. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary, because carrying it is what's kept you tired, confused, lost. You weren't weak. You were buried beneath layers of expectations, obligations, and illusions. And now you rise. Not because someone told you to, but because something inside you can no longer stay asleep. You don't need a 5-step plan. You don't need a new identity. You just need to listen to the quiet voice that says, "This isn't it." That voice is not your enemy. It's your compass. And if you follow it, it will take you to places no algorithm can lead you. It will take you back to yourself. Because in the end, this whole thing, this system, this society, this perfectly curated illusion, only works if you forget who you are. It only works if you believe that your life has to look a certain way to be valid. If you believe that success means stress, that love means sacrifice, that freedom means money, that your dreams have to make sense to anyone else but you. But you're remembering now, and memory is medicine. You're remembering that success is peace, that love is not something you earn, that freedom is a state of being, not a reward, that your soul didn't come here to win a race, it came to evolve, to grow, to wake up. So you stop running, you stop performing, you stop pretending you don't feel what you feel. And in that stillness, something ancient returns. A knowing, a strength, a clarity that says, "This is not who I am, this is who I became to survive. And now I choose to live, not tomorrow, not when the timing is perfect, not when the system changes, now. Because waiting is how the system wins. It wants you to wait for the perfect moment, the right approval, the green light that never comes. But you don't need their permission, you never did. You are the permission. You are the green light. You are the revolution, not because you fight the system, but because you stop feeding it. You unplug from the matrix not by shouting in the streets, but by choosing truth in a world of noise. By choosing wholeness over performance, presence over distraction, soul over spectacle. And when you do that, you change everything, not all at once, not in some explosive moment, but breath by breath, choice by choice, step by sacred step. You walk away from the lie, you come home to yourself, and that is the beginning of everything real. Because once you've tasted what's real, you can't go back, not fully, not comfortably. The old world becomes too loud, too artificial, too small. The conversations feel hollow, the goals feel empty, the pace feels violent. And no matter how well you play the game, something inside you keeps whispering, "This isn't where I belong. And you're right. You were never meant to live in a world that rewards pretending and punishes truth. You begin to feel the separation between who you've been and who you really are. And at first, that gap can feel like loss, like something breaking, like something falling apart. But it's not falling apart. It's falling away. The layers that never belonged. The stories you didn't write. The masks you wore to survive. That isn't your life crumbling. It's the lie dissolving. It's the beginning of you, uncloaked and unchained. And in that space you rediscover what it means to be human, not in the way society defines it, not as a cog, a consumer, a number in a metric, but as a soul, in motion, a presence in this strange, beautiful, burning world. You start to listen differently, not just to others, but to yourself, to the body you used to ignore, to the feelings you used to suppress, to the wisdom that rises when you stop filling the silence. You realize that your body isn't a machine, it's a compass, that your exhaustion isn't laziness, it's intelligence, that your anxiety isn't weakness, it's truth speaking through tension. Your body has been trying to tell you for years that something is wrong with the way we're living, and now, finally, you're listening. And when you do, something profound happens. You stop needing so much, not because you've given up, but because you've woken up. You no longer crave what the system conditioned you to chase. You don't need endless notifications, constant approval, or a timeline of staged achievements to feel valid. You realize that joy doesn't come from what you accumulate. It comes from what you let go of. And the most powerful things you can release are the illusion. The illusion that you're behind. The illusion that you're not enough. The illusion that you have to earn your right to rest, to breathe, to be. These lies are the true enemies of your peace, and every time you see through one, you reclaim a piece of yourself. You begin to walk differently through the world, not arrogantly, not defiantly, but consciously. You're no longer rushing through life like it's a task list to be completed. You're moving with intention. You're speaking with presence. You're listening with your heart open instead of your judgment loaded. You don't have to control the room. You don't need to dominate the conversation. Because you're not performing anymore, you're living. And when you live like that, you give other people permission to do the same, without preaching, without convincing, just by being, just by embodying a truth that so many have forgotten. You become the quiet reminder that there is another way, that you can be successful and still be soft, that you can be powerful and still be kind, that you can be awake and still be grounded in love. And that's the ultimate rebellion. Not to fight the system with the same weapons it uses, but to become so rooted in your truth that no system can shake you. To unplug not just from the digital web, but from the mental cage. To stop looking outside for the life that only unfolds from within. You don't need a guru. You don't need a savior. You don't need to be fixed. What you need is to remember. Remember what you knew before the world told you who to be. Remember that peace isn't found, it's returned to. That joy isn't chased, it's allowed. That clarity isn't earned, it's revealed. And the more you remember, the more the illusion starts to lose its power. Not because it vanishes, but because you stop feeding it your attention. And attention is everything. Where your attention goes, your energy flows. And for most of your life, they've been hijacking it. With fear, with urgency, with noise. But now, you take it back, and you point it inward. You point it toward the breath, toward presence, toward the mystery of simply being here, alive in this moment. And that's when you begin to feel something sacred, not religious, not dogmatic, just real. You begin to feel life again, not life as it's marketed, but life as it truly is. Messy, magnificent, uncertain, and overflowing with wonder. You realize that the depth you've been searching for in achievement, in recognition, in external success, has been quietly waiting for you inside your own being, beneath the noise, beneath the hustle, beneath the programming. And in that moment, you stop searching for the truth, because you are the truth. You were always the truth. You are what they could never control, the unquantifiable, the unpredictable, the presence that no algorithm can replicate. That's what they're afraid of. That's why the system was built to distract you from yourself. Because a person who knows themselves cannot be enslaved. A person who knows themselves doesn't need permission, doesn't need validation, doesn't need the next shiny thing to feel worthy. They just are. And so are you. You are not lost. You are returning. And every breath you take with awareness, every decision you make in alignment, every moment you choose truth over noise, is a revolution, not the loud kind, the sacred kind, the kind that ripples out in quiet waves, shifting the frequency of everything it touches. You may not see the change instantly, but you'll feel it. You'll feel it in your nervous system, in your relationships, in the way you speak to yourself, in the space between your thoughts, in the weight that slowly lifts as you stop carrying what was never yours. This isn't just about escaping the system. This is about remembering what it means to be free. Free in a way that has nothing to do with location or money or permission. Free in your breath. Free in your thoughts. Free in your presence. Because true freedom isn't given to you. It's remembered inside of you. And you begin to realize all the gates that once seemed locked were never locked at all. They were propped up by belief, by fear, by repetition. The stories you were told became the bars, but once you stop believing them, they lose their weight. And suddenly you see a path where before there was only a wall. Not a path someone else carved out for you, not a blueprint, not a strategy, not a step-by-step life plan, but a path that's alive. A path that changes as you change, that deepens as you slow down, that widens every time you choose truth over convenience. This is the path of real power, not the kind you wield over others, but the kind that emerges when you are finally in right relationship with yourself. Because when you stop outsourcing your worth, you stop being easy to control. You stop saying yes to things that break your spirit. You stop watering yourself down so others can digest you. You stop being a shapeshifter, and instead you become rooted, grounded, clear, unapologetically whole. And in that wholeness you no longer need the world to shrink to fit your wounds. You begin to heal, not because someone came to rescue you, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. You started listening. You started asking questions like, what do I truly value? What makes me feel alive? What would I still do if no one ever saw it? And what am I willing to let go of, to become who I actually am? These aren't surface-level questions, these are initiations. And most people never ask them, not because they're not capable, but because the world keeps them too busy to hear their own soul. Always another task, another distraction, another dopamine hit. But there comes a moment when the noise becomes unbearable, when the outer world, no matter how curated or optimized or successful, just doesn't match the inner truth anymore. Then that moment, as uncomfortable as it may be, is a gift. Because that's when you stop trying to fix the surface and you start digging deeper. You stop patching the symptoms and start getting honest about the root. You look at the lies you inherited, the labels you clung to, the roles you played to feel loved, and you realize that the system didn't just control your actions, it shaped your identity. It told you who to be, and you believed it, but not anymore. Now you remember, you are not your job, you are not your trauma. You are not the voice that criticizes you when you wake up. You are not the number in your bank account, the likes on your screen, or the roles you were taught to perform. You are the space behind it all. You are awareness itself. And once you truly know that, not just as an idea but as a felt experience, the illusion begins to collapse. And when it does, you grieve. You grieve the years you spent asleep, the dreams you put on hold, the parts of you had to silence to survive. That grief is sacred. Let it come. Let it wash over you. Let it cleanse the parts of you that forgot. You are not weak for feeling it. You are wise. You are waking up. And waking up is not clean. It's not pretty. It's messy. It's raw. It strips away what's false and leaves you naked in the truth. But in that rawness there's beauty, because when you strip it all back, what's left is real. What's left is you, not the brand, not the performance, not the conditioned mask, but the breath, the heart, the soul, the being that came here to experience something more than survival, something deeper than success, something richer than validation. You came here to remember, and the remembering isn't linear. It doesn't happen in a single epiphany. It's a returning, a spiral, a peeling back. It happens when you say no to what you once accepted, when you rest without guilt, when you speak your truth even when your voice shakes, when you let people see who you actually are, not who you pretend to be, and when you allow yourself to be seen in your rawness, your uncertainty, your becoming. That's when the chains begin to break, because the system can only control what you're afraid to reveal. But when you have nothing left to hide, you become untouchable. Not invincible, not above pain, but untouchable in your truth. You are no longer playing their game. You are writing your own story, a story that honors your pace, your energy, your truth, a story that allows for depth, for presence, for mystery, one that doesn't seek to be efficient, but to be meaningful, one that doesn't try to impress, but to express. And maybe, just maybe, your story becomes the medicine that reminds someone else they're not alone, that it's okay to question, that it's okay to feel lost, that it's okay to begin again, because that's how the awakening spreads. Not through force, but through resonance, through the courage to live in a way that reflects what's real, even when the world around you is still hypnotized. You become the lighthouse, the reminder, the mirror. And you do it not by being perfect, you do it by being present, by being honest, by being awake. And the world in all its madness begins to look a little different, not because it changed, but because you did. Because once you change, even the system starts to lose its grip. It can't control someone who sees through it. It can't manipulate someone who's reclaimed their own mind. And the deeper you go into your own awareness, the more clearly you begin to see the programming for what it is. A story. A very old, very loud story. Repeated so many times it became a belief, dressed up as reality. But it was never yours, taught to you, embedded in you before you had the words to resist. But you have the words now. You have the presence. You have the knowing that doesn't come from textbooks or timelines, but from within. And that knowing is your compass. It doesn't scream, it doesn't demand, it simply waits. It waits for you to be quiet enough to hear it, because truth doesn't compete with noise. It doesn't argue. It just is. And now that you've seen it, you'll start to feel how deeply unnatural this world has become. Not because nature has failed, but because we've moved so far from it. You'll feel the ache in your body when you've been disconnected too long. You'll feel the emptiness behind the endless scrolling, the dissonance in rooms full of people pretending not to feel what they feel. You'll begin to crave something different. Not louder, but realer, something slower, simpler, more sacred. And in that craving, you'll start to make different choices. You'll stop saying yes out of guilt. You'll stop confusing busyness with purpose. You'll start to realize that you don't need to earn your existence through exhaustion. You were never meant to be a machine. You were meant to be a human being, a soul, a breath, an unfolding mystery. And the moment you stop trying to fit into a system that was never designed for your liberation, you begin to create something new. Not a rebellion fueled by rage, but a revolution born of remembering. You remember how to move at your own pace, how to choose presence over productivity, how to give yourself permission to rest, to feel, to not know. You stop living on autopilot and start paying attention to the way sunlight feels on your skin, to the silence between your thoughts, to the weight of your own intuition rising like a tide that can't be ignored. And the more you trust that voice, the less you need the outside world to guide you. Because the truth is, you were never lost. You were just distracted, pulled in every direction except inward. trained to look for answers in systems that profit from your confusion. But the more you come back to yourself, the more the illusion begins to crumble. And what's left? What's underneath it all? Peace. Not the kind you find in a retreat or a weekend away or a temporary escape. The kind of peace that lives in your bones. The kind that can't be shaken by someone's opinion. The kind that doesn't need to be explained. It just is. Like a mountain, like the ocean, like truth. And with that peace comes power. Not power over others, but power within. The power to choose, to listen, to walk away, to start over, to speak up, to be still, to let things go, to stop performing, to live in alignment with what you know, even if no one else understands it. That is the power they never wanted you to find. Because once you have it, you can't be bribed. You can't be scared into submission. You can't be baited by false promises. You are already full. And when you're full, the system loses its grip. Because the system feeds on your emptiness. It feeds on your insecurity. It survives on your doubt. That's why it never wants you to feel whole. Because a whole human doesn't consume endlessly. A whole human doesn't obey blindly. A whole human doesn't settle for shallow when their soul is made for depth. So yes, this awakening is inconvenient. It will cost you your comfort, your illusions, maybe even some relationships. But what you gain in return is priceless. You gain yourself. Not the self they taught you to be, not the version of you they praised for fitting in, the real you, the one that breathes freely, that speaks truth, that walks with sacred rebellion in their heart and softness in their step. And maybe that's why you're really here. Not just to learn or heal or grow, but to remember. To remember that you are not your trauma. You are not your productivity. You are not here to survive a system that feeds on your disconnection. You are here to be alive. Fully, deeply, unapologetically alive. And when you live like that, you don't just change your life. You change the collective field. Your energy becomes a frequency of truth that others can feel. You become a tuning fork for what's real. You walk into a room and shift the energy without saying a word, not because you're trying to impress, but because you're not pretending. And in a world full of actors, authenticity is magnetic. So, don't underestimate the ripple you create by simply being awake. Don't downplay the power of your presence. Don't believe the lie that you have to shout to make a difference. Sometimes the most radical act is to walk away from the noise and live in truth, quietly, consistently, fiercely. That's how the scam ends. Not all at once, not through a revolution on the outside, but through 1,000 subtle choices on the inside, choosing to feel instead of numb, to question instead of conform, to live instead of perform, and to trust that your being is enough. Not because the world told you so, but because it always was. And maybe, just maybe, that's what they feared most all along. Not your rebellion, that you're remembering, because when you remember you reclaim everything they tried to make you forget. You remember your worth isn't tied to your usefulness. You remember that love isn't something you earn. You remember that your sensitivity is not a flaw. Your slowness is not a weakness. Your questions are not a threat, they're a doorway. And once you step through it, nothing looks the same again. You start to see the scaffolding, the invisible architecture that holds up this illusion of normal. You see how people perform happiness, how they smile with tired eyes, how they collect things instead of experiences, how they trade their truth for comfort because they're afraid of what freedom might cost. You see how we've been trained to doubt ourselves so thoroughly that we outsource every decision, every instinct, every bit of wisdom that once came from within. But now you look within, and what you find isn't perfect, it isn't polished, but it's yours, and it's alive. And that's what makes it dangerous to the system, because aliveness can't be monetized, it can't be managed, it can't be put on a quarterly spreadsheet. You're not efficient when you're awake, you're not predictable, you're not manageable. You're real. And in a world built on pretense, realness is resistance. You stop playing the roles. You stop editing yourself to fit someone else's story. You stop giving pieces of your soul away in exchange for belonging. Because you finally realize, if you have to shrink to fit, it's not belonging, it's betrayal. And you're done betraying yourself. You've done it enough times to know how it ends. With resentment, with fatigue, with a quiet ache that no amount of external validation can soothe. But now, you choose something different. You choose alignment over approval, integrity over acceptance, wholeness over perfection. You choose to live as if your life actually belongs to you, because it does. And that doesn't mean it'll be easy. It means it'll be real. And real is messy, it's complex. It doesn't come with guarantees or applause, but it comes with something far better. Peace. The kind of peace that doesn't disappear when circumstances change. The kind that holds you through every storm because it's rooted in truth, not in appearances. You begin to redefine everything. What it means to be successful, what it means to be safe, what it means to be free. And suddenly, you don't need the big house, the fancy title, the perfect body, or the curated image. You just need to be in alignment, to feel yourself clearly, to move from the inside out instead of the outside in. You become less reactive, more intentional, less frantic, more rooted. You realize that clarity is not something you find. It's something you uncover when you slow down long enough to feel. And in that space you begin to heal, not just physically, but emotionally, energetically, spiritually. You realize that healing isn't about fixing something broken. It's about coming back to what's whole. It's about releasing what was never yours to carry. It's about making peace with your story without letting it define your future. You stop trying to become someone, and you start remembering who you are. You realize that your essence was never lost, only buried. And the more you clear away the noise, the more you hear that essence again, in your laughter, in your breath, in the way your body softens when you're no longer performing. You realize that self-love isn't about bubble baths and affirmations. It's about truth. It's about choosing what's real even when it's uncomfortable. It's about no longer abandoning yourself to make others more comfortable. It's about creating a life where your nervous system can finally relax. And in that relaxation you remember joy. Not the high of escape, but the grounded joy of simply being, of sitting in silence and feeling whole, of watching the wind move through trees and realizing you are connected to everything, of looking in the mirror and seeing someone you no longer need to fix, just someone you're learning to love. Again and again and again. This is the quiet revolution, the one that doesn't make headlines but changes everything. Because when one person remembers, it ripples. It touches their children, their friends, their community. It shifts the frequency of a room, a relationship, a life. And over time, those ripples become waves. Not loud, not violent, but unstoppable. Because truth, once awakened, doesn't go back to sleep. And neither will you. Not fully. Not for long. Because now you've felt it. You've tasted the freedom that comes from within. And that taste makes you brave. Brave enough to keep letting go. To keep choosing presence over performance, truth over tradition, purpose over programming. You begin to live like your soul matters, because it does. You begin to speak like your voice counts, because it does. You begin to walk like your steps shape reality, because they do. You've been taught to be small, to be quiet, to be realistic, but now you know. Those were never your thoughts. They were inherited fears, passed down by generations too burdened to question. But now you're questioning. Now you're disrupting the cycle. Now you're daring to live differently. And that, in itself, is sacred. Not perfect, but sacred. You don't have to burn the whole world down to build something better. You just have to stop building the illusion. You just have to stop feeding the machine with your life force. You just have to stop giving energy to what drains you, and give it instead to what ignites you, nourishes you, grounds you, expands you. Because the world doesn't change when you shout at the darkness. It changes when you become the light. And you are the light. Even if you forgot, even if you doubted, even if no one ever told you, you are the light. And it's time to remember. It's time to remember who you were before they told you who to be, before the metrics, before the mirrors, before the world placed its weight on your shoulders and called it responsibility. You were never meant to carry so much. You were never meant to chase so hard. Life was never supposed to feel like an endless to-do list you could never quite catch up to. You were meant to be, to breathe, to feel, to connect. And somewhere along the way they made that seem radical, as if presence was a luxury, as if slowness was a sin, as if softness was something to be ashamed of. But now you know better. Because what they called laziness was often your soul refusing to play along. What they called rebellion was often your intuition refusing to be silenced. What they called weird or sensitive or unrealistic, those were just fragments of your freedom trying to surface, trying to break through the concrete, trying to remind you that there is another way, a quieter, deeper, more honest way to exist. And maybe it doesn't make sense to the world. Maybe it doesn't fit neatly into boxes or timelines or 5-year plans, but it fits you, and that's enough. That's more than enough. Because your life doesn't have to look good on paper if it feels right in your bones. The world doesn't have to understand your path for it to be valid. The system doesn't have to approve of your pace for it to be sacred. You were not born to be efficient, you were born to be alive. You were born to laugh loudly, to cry freely, to speak truthfully, to love fully. And none of that fits within the machine, because the machine needs you to be small, predictable, productive, manageable, but your soul was never made for management. It was made for mystery, for wildness, for wonder. And the more you honor that, the more whole you become. Stop chasing things that were never meant for you. You stop comparing your timing to theirs. You stop apologizing for your light, your depth, your intensity, your truth. And in that unapologetic space you begin to glow differently, not for attention, not for validation, but because you've finally stopped dimming. You finally started living in alignment with who you actually are, not who the world told you to be. And yes, it's uncomfortable at first. It's disorienting to leave a script you've followed your entire life. It's vulnerable to say, I don't know what's next, but I know this isn't it. It's terrifying to choose the unknown over the familiar. But your soul doesn't need certainty, it needs truth. And the truth is, you've outgrown the cage. Even if you can still fit inside it, even if you still know how to pretend, something inside you refuses to be silent now. That's not rebellion, that's evolution. And it can't be reversed. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you taste freedom, false safety will never satisfy you again. Once you begin to walk in truth, anything less will feel like suffocation, and the world will notice. Some people will resist your shift. They'll project their fears onto your freedom. They'll try to pull you back into the role you once played. But their discomfort is not your responsibility. Their confusion is not your burden. You are not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to be true to yourself. And those who are meant to walk with you, they'll find you. They'll feel you. Not because you performed for them, but because you showed up as yourself. Fully, unfiltered, undeniably you. That's how real connection is formed. Not through perfection, but through presence, through courage, through authenticity. That's what changes lives. Not the image, but the energy. And when your energy is clear, when your choices are rooted in truth, you no longer need the world to reflect your worth. You already know. You already feel it. You don't need to prove anything. You just need to keep showing up, keep breathing, keep choosing what aligns with your soul, even when it's scaring, even when it's unpopular, even when you're walking alone for a while. Because this path you're on, It's not about being better than anyone else. It's not about being enlightened or evolved or spiritually superior. It's about being real. It's about remembering who you are beneath the noise, beneath the conditioning, beneath the layers of identity that were never really yours. It's about being fully human, messy, magical, awake. And from that place you begin to create not just art or work or ideas, you begin to create a new reality, one rooted in presence, one built on truth, one that doesn't require you to abandon yourself to succeed. You begin to redefine what success even means, not as the accumulation of things, but as the expression of soul, not as the chasing of dreams, but as the embodiment of peace, not as the winning of a race, but as the deep knowing that you were never behind. Because how could you be behind in a life that's unfolding exactly as it's meant to? How could you be late to your own awakening? How could you be wrong for growing in the direction your soul is pulling you? You're not late. You're right on time. And this moment, this remembering, this return, is the beginning of your real life. Not the life you were told to want, the life that fits you, the one that breathes with you, evolves with you, expands with you, the one that doesn't need to be understood to be sacred, the one that doesn't require a roadmap to be worth traveling. So breathe, deeper than you have in days, not because you're trying to get somewhere, but because for the first time in a long time, you finally arrived. You finally arrived not at a destination, but at yourself. At the place within you that never needed to be anything other than exactly what it is. And now that you're here, now that you've remembered, everything looks different. The things you used to chase seem hollow. The noise you used to believe feels thin. And the urgency that used to control you, it softens, it slows. Because you realize you were never racing against time, you were racing against disconnection. And you've reconnected, not to the illusion, but to the source, to the still, steady center inside you that was never touched by the lies, never shaken by the chaos, never fooled by the game. That part of you, the observer, the witness, the soul, it always knew. It was just waiting for you to get quiet enough to hear it. And now you're listening, and now you're seeing, and now you're choosing to no longer be an actor in someone else's play, choosing to no longer dim yourself to survive, choosing to no longer accept a life that leaves you empty. You're not here to impress a system built on dysfunction. You're here to live in truth, and truth, by its very nature, dismantles everything built on lies. That's why it's so feared. That's why it's so powerful. Because when one person wakes up, the entire illusion starts to tremble. Not because the system loses control of everyone, but because it loses control of you. And in that moment you become a living contradiction to everything it stands for. You become presence in a world that profits from distraction. You become peace in a culture addicted to conflict. You become freedom in a society built on subtle chains. And when you move like that, when you speak from that place, when you live from that frequency, people notice. Even if they don't understand it, they feel it. Your energy becomes a mirror. It reflects what they've forgotten. It reminds them of something ancient, something sacred, something that can't be bought, sold, or downloaded, something that has to be lived. And maybe that's the greatest gift you'll ever give, your full, awakened self. Not for applause, not for praise, but because it's the only way to truly live. And you start to realize this was never about escaping the system. It was about no longer feeding it, no longer giving it your mind, your attention, your sacred energy. Because energy is currency, and you've spent too long investing in what drains you. Now you invest in what returns you to yourself, your body, your breath, your truth, your path. And on that path things begin to shift. You stop trying to change people who don't want to change. You stop waiting for external permission to follow your internal knowing. You stop negotiating with your intuition just to avoid discomfort. You learn to sit in the unknown. You learn to trust your timing. You learn to let go of what was never yours to carry. And in that letting go you create space. Space for healing. Space for depth. Space for the parts of you that were silenced to finally speak. And they have so much to say. The younger version of you. The one who dreamed before the world told you to be realistic. The one who felt deeply before you were told to toughen up. The one who saw beauty in everything before screens replaced wonder. That part of you is still here. And it doesn't want revenge. It wants reunion. It wants you to slow down, to look around, to remember that life was never supposed to be something you survive. It was always meant to be something you feel. And maybe that's what they fear most. People who feel again. Because a person who feels can no longer be numbed into submission. A person who feels remembers that there is more to life than what can be tracked, traded, or scaled. A person who feels becomes uncontrollable. And you, right now, are becoming that. Not in rebellion, but in reverence. Because the most powerful form of rebellion is living in a way that honors your truth when the world demands your conformity. It's breathing slowly when they tell you to move faster. It's choosing silence when everything around you is screaming. It's saying no without guilt. It's saying yes without fear. It's waking up each day and choosing to live from the inside out, not because it's easy, but because it's the only way to stay whole. And yes, you will stumble. Yes, you will doubt. Yes, you will fall back into the old programming, but the difference now, you'll notice. You'll catch it. You'll feel the misalignment like a rock in your shoe, not because you're failing, but because you're finally awake. And once you're awake, every misstep is just a reminder to realign. Every moment of forgetting becomes another invitation to remember. And you will remember. More and more. Breath by breath. Choice by choice. Until one day you wake up and realize that the world didn't change, you did. And that was enough to change everything that mattered. Your relationships, your energy, your clarity, your sense of self. You won't need to prove anything. You won't need to escape anything, because you'll be living in something that is true. A life that feels like yours, a pace that nourishes you, a purpose that doesn't have to be shouted from rooftops because it's written into every step you take. And that, right there, is the revolution they never saw coming. Not a war, not a riot, but a quiet remembering. A return to soul. And you, just by being who you really are leading it. And maybe that's all this was ever about, remembering. Not learning, not becoming, but remembering what was always there, who you were before the conditioning, before the noise, before the world told you to be anything other than what you are. You didn't come here to be perfect. You came here to be present. You didn't come here to meet expectations. You came here to expand. You didn't come here to be consumed by the system. You came here to remember that you are so much more than anything they could ever measure. And you see how society rewards the mask and punishes the truth. You see how people trade their authenticity for approval, their voice for belonging, their soul for security. And you no longer want to play that game, because winning a broken game still leaves you broken, and you are no longer willing to sacrifice your peace for validation. You are no longer willing to abandon yourself just to fit into a version of life that was never designed with your spirit in mind. You choose differently now. You choose what feels real over what looks good. You choose presence over performance. You choose silence over noise. You choose peace, not as a place you reach, but as a place you return to over and over again, inside yourself. Even when the world tries to pull you away, even when the screens scream for your attention, even when fear tries to seduce you back into the lie, you return. Because now you know the way, now you remember the truth. Your worth is not in how much you do, it's in how deeply you feel. That your value is not in how much you give away, it's in how much you hold sacred. That your power is not in how much you produce, it's in how fully you choose to be here, alive, awake, whole. And with that knowing, you start to build something new. A life that doesn't revolve around proving. A schedule that doesn't ignore your body. a rhythm that moves with your breath instead of against it. You surround yourself with people who speak the language of depth, people who look you in the eye and mean it, people who see you not for what you do but for who you are when you stop trying, because now you know the difference between connection and performance, between love and dependency, between truth and tradition. You no longer confuse stimulation with fulfillment. You no longer confuse control with clarity. You no longer believe that constant motion means progress, because you've tasted what real alignment feels like, and you'd rather lose everything than lose that again. And when you do that, when you commit to truth at all costs, the world responds, slowly, subtly, but undeniably. You start to notice the synchronicities, the moments that feel orchestrated by something greater, the peace that finds you in the middle of chaos, the quiet sense of guidance that replaces anxiety with trust. You start to experience what it means to be in flow, not because you've mastered some technique, but because you've stopped resisting who you really are. And who you are, beneath the fear, beneath the stories, beneath the programming, is sacred. Not someday, not once you've healed, not once you've figured everything out, right now, as you are, breathing, watching, feeling. And the more you live from that space, the more the illusion fades. You start to see that the system only had power because you gave it yours, that the prison was never physical, it was perceptual, built with beliefs, maintained through fear, reinforced by repetition, but no longer. Because the moment you remembered who you were, you broke the spell, and in that crack of awareness the truth began to pour in. You are not here to be controlled. You are not here to be productive at the expense of your soul. You are not here to chase dreams that were never yours to begin with. You are here to remember, to feel, to awaken. And now that you have, the question becomes, what will you do with that knowing? Because the truth alone is not enough. It must be lived. It must be walked. It must be chosen in the quiet moments, when no one is watching, when the old patterns rise like ghosts asking you to dance one more time. It must be chosen when you're tired, when you're scared, when it would be easier to go back to sleep. And sometimes you will, it's okay, that's part of it. But even then, you'll never be fully asleep again. Because once you've seen the illusion, you can't unsee it. Once you've heard the truth, you can't unhear it. Once you've tasted freedom, nothing else will ever satisfy you. So keep choosing it. Keep choosing the path that feels like home, even when it's unmarked, even when it's slow, even when it makes no sense to anyone else. Keep choosing to honor what's real. Keep choosing to breathe deeper, walk slower, speak softer. Keep choosing to live as if your soul matters, because it does. And when the world tries to pull you back into its rhythm, just remember, you don't owe your energy to a system that profits from your disconnection. You don't owe your life to a dream that costs you your peace. You don't owe your identity to a culture that never took the time to see you. You owe yourself the truth. You owe yourself the stillness. You owe yourself the freedom to be fully, unapologetically, undeniably you. And the greatest scam? It only works when you forget that. So don't forget. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget what matters. Don't forget that in the silence between the noise, you are free.